All right, let's get into it. We are about to take a trip back in time to explore something you probably think you know all about: getting a good night's sleep. But I have a feeling that after this, you are never going to look at your 8 hours the same way again.
So let me just start with this question. What if that moment, you know the one, when you're just staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night, totally frustrated, what if that's not a sign of modern anxiety, but an ancient echo of how human beings are actually wired to sleep?
See, for centuries, people didn't sleep in one long, solid chunk. They had something called two sleeps. So yeah, you can forget everything you thought you knew. Let's dig into how this actually worked.
The whole idea is called segmented sleep. And before we had electricity and 9-to-5 schedules, this was just normal all across Europe. Waking up in the middle of the night wasn't seen as a problem at all. It was just part of the daily routine.
And the rhythm was actually pretty simple. You'd go to bed not long after the sun went down for your first sleep. Then, around midnight, you'd naturally wake up for an hour, maybe two. They called this the watch. And after that, you'd just go back to bed for your second sleep until morning.
So what in the world did people do in the middle of the night with no phones and no Netflix? Well, it turns out this was actually one of the most productive, quiet, and even social hours of the entire day.
I mean, look at this list. They did practical stuff, like tending the fire so it wouldn't go out or checking on the animals. It was also this really treasured time for quiet prayer and just thinking. And get this, doctors and marriage manuals actually said this was the ideal time for intimacy because you were perfectly rested and calm. And this is really the most important thing to get. Waking up in the dead of night wasn't a failure. It wasn't a sign of bad sleep. It was an expected, useful part of their day. It was a feature, not a bug.
Okay, so their schedule was totally different. But what about the bed itself? Well, let's just say it was less heavenly mattress and more a pile of stuff.
This comparison is just amazing. I mean, forget cooling gel or memory foam. For most people, a bed, or a pallet as they called it, was literally just a cloth sack stuffed with straw, which, as you can imagine, was a five-star hotel for insects, lice, and, yep, even the occasional mouse. Comfort was not the goal here, just surviving the night was.
And you know how we talk about having a nightcap? Well, back then, it wasn't a drink. It was a literal cap, a pointy hat. Medieval houses were incredibly drafty and cold, and since you lose most of your body heat through your head, a wool hat was basically essential to keep from freezing in your sleep.
And if the straw and the bugs weren't enough for you, try this on for size. If you were traveling and stayed at an inn, it was totally normal to share a bed with up to 4 complete strangers. The idea of personal space? Yeah, that wasn't really a thing.
And as this quote so beautifully puts it, your bedmates were a total roll of the dice. You were just crammed in there with people who, let's just say, came with their own unique features. You just had to cross your fingers and hope for the best.
What about central heating? Well, in the Middle Ages, that was called a pig. Seriously. In peasant homes, it was common for the family livestock to sleep right there in the same room because their body heat helped keep the place warm. A little gross, maybe, but hey, it worked.
But the challenges weren't just physical. Going to sleep back then was a really serious spiritual moment. The night was seen as this dangerous time, full of terrors, both real and not so real.
We think of this as a sweet little children's prayer, but back then, it was a deadly serious plea. The chance of not waking up because of a sickness, a fire, anything was very, very real. This prayer wasn't just to make you feel better, it was considered a necessary spiritual protection.
I love this analogy. Think of bedtime prayer as medieval antivirus software. It wasn't just about finding peace. It was about doing one last scan of your soul for the day to protect it from the demons and evil spirits that were believed to wander around in the dark.
And your dreams? Oh, they weren't just random thoughts. No way. Dreams were seen as direct messages, either from God or from the devil. A bad dream wasn't something you just shrugged off in the morning. It was something you might actually go and confess to a priest because it could mean your soul was in real trouble.
So you have to wonder, if this whole two sleeps thing was the norm for hundreds and hundreds of years, what happened? How did we get so obsessed with our 8 uninterrupted hours?
Well, this pretty much sums it up. Our sleep pattern is actually a pretty recent invention. It was the Industrial Revolution, with its gas lamps that lit up the night and rigid factory schedules, that really demanded a single solid block of sleep. We weren't designed for it, we were kind of forced into it.
And that brings us right back to where we started. That thing we call insomnia, that tendency to wake up in the middle of the night. Maybe it's not a disorder at all. Maybe it's just our body remembering a much older, more natural way of sleeping.
So, here's a final thought for you. The next time you find yourself wide awake in the dead of night, don't freak out. Maybe just try whispering to yourself, "Ah, the watch has begun." And see that moment not as a problem, but as a connection. Are you an insomniac? Or are you just a little bit medieval?